Yeah.
Right, here we go.
So let's do that again. Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Podcasting for Dummies, the companion podcast. My name is Chuck Tomasi, one of the co-authors of the book. And well, I'm here again with T. Morris. How are you, T?
I'm the other guy in the book. Hey, how you doing, everybody?
I'll take the upside down one for everyone in Australia. I gotta say, this is like, we've said it before. I feel so blessed and honored that we've got a 4th edition of this book.
It's amazing, isn't it?
How many? I look at the Amazon stats weekly. Every Monday, it's part of my ritual to go in and see not only where we rank, but who's at the top of the list.
I thought I was aggressive, Chad. I thought I was aggressive. I thought I was the guy that was like obsessed with the numbers. And then Chuck's like, "Yeah, I was checking our numbers this week, too. We got to do something." I'm like, Chuck, the book's been out for 4 days. Chill.
But I don't see any other podcasting books out there with a companion podcast,
which boggles my mind. All right. So
isn't that insane?
So quick story.
And we've been doing this for since like
2007.
years.
15 years.
How do you not? Maybe they hate us, or I don't know.
No. What I think is funny. What I think is funny is this. I remember, getting the Wayback Machine. It's 2000 and 2005, and we're talking about ways to promote podcasting for dummies, right? So it's me, Evo, the original co-author for Podcasting for Dummies, me, Evo Terra, and the marketing guy from Wiley Publishing, and our chief now is chief editor, now then editor Steve Hayes. And we're all sitting around and said, "So you guys got any ideas on how to promote this Podcasting for Dummies?" And I said, "Well, we could do a companion podcast about the book."
Low-hanging fruit, people. Low-hanging fruit.
And I threw that out there, and there was crickets. And I heard the marketing guy go, "We are just thinking about doing this." And I'm like, "Guys, come on. Like you said, it's out there. If the book on podcasting doesn't have its own podcast, something is seriously, horrendously wrong."
And it goes back to that point that not everything in print translates to what you can convey. How do you compare microphones, for example, in a book? You don't. This is a dynamic microphone. This is a condenser microphone. So anyway, that feeds into our topic today about fishing for listeners.
Yep.
How do you get your name out there? How do you get more exposure so people are aware of your podcast? T, speaking of low-hanging fruit, what's your first easy tip?
My first easy tip is to get an idea of how do you describe your podcast? How do you describe what it is that your podcast is all about, right? And a perfect example is Happy Hour from the Tower. Right. This is when people ask me, what is Happy Hour from the Tower? And I sum it up this way. 3 knuckleheads who absolutely love the game Destiny. And that way, this. It's a video game podcast. It's a video game podcast about Destiny. And the 3 people who are doing it do not take themselves that seriously because they refer to themselves as knuckleheads. And when you listen to it, you get the idea. It is light. It is fun. It is goofy. We're having a good time. And that's the way it should be. We don't talk about killer strats. We just talk about what we love about this game. Which brings me to the next thing. If you want to really promote your podcast, it's less about the podcast itself and more about specific episodes. So you better get good at writing a press release, because you're going to find those special shows that you do where it's like, we're going to be raising money for charity. We're going to have a special guest on the show. We're going to do something out of the ordinary. That's what you highlight. You find that one episode, you promote it, and then after you promote it, then you start sending it, and by promoting it, I mean, you send out press releases to different places.
And if you're saying, I want to back up a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
We did two topics there. If not only what your podcast is about, because you're going to have to write that when you submit it to Apple Podcasts. We're just going to keep doing that and deal with it. Okay. It's going to go on your website. This is your description, not only what it's about, because if you just say it's a geek podcast, there's 10 billion of those, right? What makes it unique?
What makes it unique?
Hey, Star Trek shirt, wearing a Star Trek, doing a Star Trek podcast. What makes that unique? What is your unique selling point that will draw listeners to your podcast. Now, if you're not very good at writing that or the press release, find someone who is. I mentioned this is a very communal. You go to what is it? Podcast community on Facebook, where Megan Enlow is moderating that, and you ask, "Hey, I'm a graphics person, or I'm a programmer. I don't know what exactly I should write to make this effective." Work with those people, bounce ideas. Most of them are happy to contribute. Maybe you got to, give them a pizza voucher or something, but it generally doesn't go far beyond that to get some help.
Exactly. And when it comes to promoting your podcast, it really is no different than promoting any other kind of a content, whether it is your album, whether it is your book, whether it is your stream. You have to come up with an elevator pitch, and then after the elevator pitch, you then come up with the details. And then if people want even more details than that, you go into the stuff that we talk about in the book, where we talk about things like when people ask about your podcast, especially if you start getting into advertising, which we'll talk about a little later in this particular episode, you're getting into that sort of area of, okay, people are going to be asking about your bandwidth. How much bandwidth do you go through? What, how many episodes, how many listeners do you have? That sort of thing. And when you get into that kind of promotion, you have to be very careful about it, because if you spin it the wrong way, you could be setting yourself up for failure. And so, when it comes to, telling people about your podcast, be able to sum it up in one sentence, then be able to sum it up in 3 sentences, and then for the deep dive, that's where you go into details. And again,
in the business world, we often refer to that as bluff. Bottom line up front. Right. What is your short and distinct? People say, "Oh, you do a podcast? What's it about?" It's called The Topic is Trek. You can probably imply what it's about from the name. It's a Star Trek podcast. There. You want to go deeper? We'll tell you more about the types of articles we do, the reviews, the games we play at the end, the personalities that are involved. You can explain all of that if you're having that. I like to imagine myself sitting next to somebody on an airplane. If they're done at the first sentence, the conversation's over. They're not going to subscribe anyway.
Exactly. I mean, and all this ties back to a marketing term called USP, unique selling proposition. And that's what we're talking about. That is exactly what we're talking about. For
sure that's not what you plug, your
No, that's USB. USB, or as I like to say...
No, they're the brown trucks that go around.
No, USB. As I like to say, Cyborg in the Joss Whedon cut of Justice League, okay? That's
too many
USB.
Acronyms
okay?
and TLAs floating around in my head. Sorry, old man at the wheel.
USP, unique selling proposition. This is what you're doing. You're basically packaging your podcast so that you can go on ahead and you can promote it on larger platforms. Now, when we say promoting, it doesn't mean, hey, we got a new episode out. You're actually physically promoting either an episode or the podcast itself. So now we get into money exchanging hands. You want to let's say you've got some money on hand. You're like, you know what? I'm going to go on ahead and I want to advertise this podcast. And this is where you have to be very careful, because I mean, that's the only way I can describe it. You have to be very careful, because when you get into marketing and advertising, you're going to hear a lot of crazy buzzwords, and I have heard enough of them to know which ones that I will respond to and which ones I will say absolutely hard stop no. And I'll give you an example. If you are courting someone that says, "Hey, I can help market your podcast," or you're going to a platform and your platform says, "Hey, we're Facebook, we'll help you market your podcast," that's great. But if they start going, "Here are the amount of impressions you get," the answer is no.
Mm-mm.
And what I mean by impressions is this. This is a buzzword you'll hear in marketing. Impressions in social media marketing is where someone says you have the potential of reaching, say, 1 million people. Now, how does an impression work? Well, the impression works is that if you've got, say, 1,000 people following you on Twitter, right? And these 1,000 people all have 10,000 people following them, and you tweet something, then there's the possibility of getting 1 million impressions if 1,000 people retweet you. That is relying on the fact that every person in your network will retweet something that you tweet.
Never happens.
Second thing is that the people who are following the people who have just retweeted you are also seeing the tweet all at the same time. So you can kind of see how impressions, while they have really big numbers attached to them, is an absolute junk stat. It is a junk stat. What you want to know is, all right, if I put an ad with you, Facebook, for example, how many, what's my CTR? And this is going to be the episode where we throw out a lot of these, a lot of these alphabet soup
I love that
terms.
band from the 60s.
Yeah, CTR. Yeah.
Have you ever seen The Rain?
Born in the
kids
Bayou.
hate it.
I love that. Anyway, CTR is click-through rate. Click-through rate. That's the one where people are physically clicking onto that link that is in that Facebook ad, and it's going from point A to point B, and they are now sitting at your podcast. That's what you want. You want that traffic leaving Facebook and going to your podcast.
And our marketing department puts out a developer newsletter every quarter, and that is an important stat. We want people to take action. Watch this video, read this blog, whatever it is. We didn't talk too much about newsletters in the book, but that's another possibility of communicating with your listeners.
Right.
The click-through rates, don't be disappointed with numbers like 3%.
Yeah.
That's actually a pretty good number.
That's a pretty good number. That's a pretty good number. It's like when you send out an email newsletter and you look at the click-through rate. I remember when someone said to me the average click-through rate for an email is 10%. And I looked at the click-through rate and I said, well, we're sitting at 15. And you would have thought that I had just made my boss's year by telling him that. And this is all built around the concept or the idea that you have money set aside to budget for advertising your podcast, not advertising on your podcast, just advertising your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And there are all different ways you can do this. But when it comes to actually investing money in, doing a sponsored link on Facebook, doing a sponsored link on Twitter, doing any kind of sponsorship on a social media platform, you really have to ask yourself, is this where my audience is, and am I getting the click-through rate that I want?
Let's talk about some free options. that the paid for stuff sounds depressing. If you ask me.
I mean, it does sound a little depressing. But it's not out of the realm. It's just what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you a realistic look at things.
Go in with your eyes open and information,
and also know what is a legit stat versus a junk stat. Yep. Like for example, in Instagram, when you're doing sponsorships on Instagram, which I've seen before for podcasts and things like that, one of the other junk stats is likes. Now you would think, well, wait a minute, that's one of the whole things of Instagram is getting the likes. Well, yes and no. If you're paying for an ad on Instagram, you're gonna get back the stats of who's liking your stuff. And when you look at the people that's liking your Instagram sponsored posts, you're gonna be like, this person's never going to listen to my Instagram or going to listen to my podcast. So again, it's less about the analytics of what could be, and more like the analytics of what is happening in present tense. That
right.
click-through rate. That's what you're aiming for. Now, as far as free options, Chuck, what would you say would be a great way to promote and fish for listeners, in a free option way?
My favorite has always been other podcasters. Reach out to other podcasters, particularly in your same genre. Find out, do they play promos, or could they play a promo and have a promotion for your podcast ready? A 30 to 60 second format is wonderful. 60 is a bit on the long side. Mm-hmm. I've heard much longer, and frankly, they're terrible. You can have that ready and say, would you be willing to, you're a Star Trek podcast, I'm a Star Trek podcast, or you're a sci-fi podcast, maybe it's SG1, maybe it's like, do they play them first, find out, right. And then say, would you be willing to swap? I'll play yours.
Yeah. Always ask if the podcast you're approaching, ask if they play promos.
Yeah.
Don't just send them your promo.
It could be in the middle, it could be at the end. Frankly, that's their show. That's their format.
Right.
Don't be picky about it, but say, hey, thank you. I've got a 30-second promo. Here's a link, or send them an email with an attachment if that works. Whatever it takes to get them that file. And hey, send me yours too. We'll drop it in.
Yep.
And you go from there. Now you've got podcasters promoting other podcasts. I hear this all the time on especially networked podcasts. That's part of I think we talked about networks a little bit, but one of the benefits of doing that is you've got those built-in promotion channels automatically there. And even the large networks do this. iHeartRadio, they're notorious, whether it's terrestrial radio or podcasts that they've got on iHeartRadio, they're always cross-promoting something.
Right.
And it never fails. That's a great way to expose your show to someone who may not have ever heard of it before. The other ultimate one is word of mouth. There's nothing beats, hey, T, have you heard about this podcast? Go to podcast meetups, whether it's on Clubhouse or we get back to in-person ones or whatever it happens to be. And you say, these are some of the ones I'm listening to. I swear half of the podcasts on my current playlist are recommendations directly from other people.
It's amazing.
That's powerful.
It's amazing. It's amazing how much promotion you get just from word of mouth. And also the more you can involve the community in your promotion, I think also is a big help. Again, this comes back from the archiving of my old computer to the new computer. One of the things that I came across, Chuck, and I don't know if you remember this, it was an early promotion that I did for Bill Above Battings. And it was Scott Sigler and JC Hutchins talking in a cafe. And they were basically trash talking each other. And then my voice comes in. My voice is supposed to sound like this. She's like, hey, you're that Sigler guy, aren't you? And it was, this promo was literally a minute and a half. So you were saying 60 seconds is on the long end, and here I am putting out a 90-minute promo. That 90-minute promo.
90 second. I hope it's not
90-minute. Wow. That 90-second promo. That is a documentary. But it was a 90-second promo, and I remember hearing somebody go, T, you're not going to get anybody to play this. That thing made the rounds because it was Hutch and Sigler trash talking each other, and then they get whacked at the end of it. And it was the guy after he waxed them in the cafe said Happy Valentine's Day from T. Morris. And then the next one was another 90-second promo. And I had on there I had Christiana Ellis, I had Sigler, and all Sigler said it was F you and F T. Morris. That's all he said. And so I was able to do it 90 minutes. One was 90-minute G-rated, 90-minute R-rated.
Seconds.
Right.
Do the translation.
Right,
He's doing the Star Trek thing where seconds are minutes and hours.
Anyway, but
Wrath of Khan reference.
But in that promo, I had Sigler, I had Hutch, I had Christiana Ellis, and I had a reference to Matthew Wayne Selznick. So I mean, again, it was trying to get people involved, and they became almost like infomercials, if you will, after the 60 second mark, because then it becomes almost like sketch theater, and I think those are some of the best promos I ever did. Was the promos I did for Billy Battings.
We've had fun with them. There's the fun ones. There's the serious ones.
Yeah.
And we could talk all day about what kind of format works for what kinds of shows. Obviously, we've got a little creativity to work with. And when I'm doing a business podcast, I want to keep it a little more straight-laced. I can still have fun with it. No, you got to know your audience, too.
Know your audience.
If I'm a developer, I can throw out developer references like, hey, we started this at episode 0, because that's the way developers count. The ones, I just have to throw this out there, the ones that just don't resonate me for whatever reason are the ones that have outtakes, not necessarily outtakes clips, but just clips of maybe what they consider highlights. And they'll be having these conversations, and maybe people are laughing, but you don't know really what they're laughing at. You feel like you're getting this. It's like they're trying to do a highlight reel, but I don't think highlight reel really.
They're trying to do a highlight reel in 60 seconds, and that's asking a lot. That's asking a lot.
It is. I have rarely seen any of those work, so that's just my personal opinion.
I mean, they're all different sort of different ways of doing promos, and the ones that do work. The ones that do work are the ones that they really understand the audience. They really know how to reach the audience. It does get harder when you're doing more straight-laced. I don't want to use the term straight-laced. More like more business-oriented material. Like if you're doing something for ServiceNow, if you're doing something for Stratford University, if you're doing something for intersections,
government,
exactly,
really
for the government. I mean, you do have to. You have to do it in a more professional manner, which is why you'll see a lot of those promos tend to be closer to the 30-second mark.
Sure.
Because they keep it simple. The worst promos for me are the ones that just basically go something like the Money Podcast at moneypodcast.com. And that's it. That's the entire promo. And I'm sitting there going, you tell me nothing except that this is a podcast about money. Is it about
maybe?
Is it about making money? Is it about investing money? Is it about saving money? Is it about printing money? Because if it's about printing money, you shouldn't be making a podcast on that. But one of the things I will
put some work into your promos, please.
Put a little bit more work in the promo.
Community is out there to give you some sounding board or actually create. I've been approached by people say, hey, would you make me you do those great promos.
Oh, I've done that before too. Oh yeah.
It's fun. We've reached out to you. Hey T, give us a promo. And
I've done that. I love doing that. I love doing promos for people. It's hella fun. I think the favorite promo I ever made for anybody was, and this was when I was at the height of my fandom for the TV show 24. And I did an I Should Be Writing promo for Mur Lafferty, and I did it as Jack Bauer. And he's typing with one hand. You hear him typing with one hand and shooting bad guys with another. And I had the guy from CTU go, Jack, we're sending backup. And he screams out, no, send me an editor, and I was completely unhinged. And I sent it to Mur, and she was like, T, I don't even watch 24, but this is so good, I'm going to play it anyway. And
right. It transcends the actual theme and go, this is good, and I have no idea what the reference is, but it's
yeah, exactly.
Those are fun.
Now, another great way, another free way, but again, it's about knowing your audience, is giving interviews. And whether it's giving interviews about whether it's about your podcast or whether it's about what you do that inspired the podcast, the thing is, like, for example, if I wanted to talk about Happy Hour from the Tower, I probably wouldn't go to Technorama, because I don't know if Chuck and Craig and all the guys on Technorama, they know what Destiny is, but they don't play Destiny. Sure. And since they're not, steeped into video games the way I am, then chances are that's not a good topic to jive with. However, if I've got a new science fiction novel coming out, some of the first people I'm going to reach out to are the folks at Technorama, because they do read my stuff. They do know me from podcasting. They know me from science fiction circles. So they're going to be like, yeah, T, come on in. Let's talk about the new novel. And giving those interviews giving interviews about your podcast and about the subject matter around your podcast is a great way of promoting yourself. But you want to make sure that wherever you're going to offer, not say, hey, I'll do an interview for your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You first need to query said podcast and go, do you do interviews?
Yeah.
First
would
and
you
foremost,
be open to? Yeah.
Do you do interviews? Second, would you be interested in interviewing? And then you have to pitch yourself. And this goes back to what we were talking about with writing press releases. Press releases are just formal pitches about what you do. So in a sense, when you start promoting yourself as I'm available for interviews, you need to pitch to this podcast exactly why you would be a good interview for their show. And that's just something to consider. Do you know how to pitch yourself? And if you do, more power to you. You know what you're doing.
Yeah, the interviews are a lot of fun. The interviews are a lot of fun. They can be, and even if we were to have T on Technorama, for example, talking about his latest book, we can still go, hey, I understand you also do a live stream on Twitch. Tell us a little bit about that. So you can dive into that without making it the topic of the show, but just to show the breadth of things that he does. And we can, I do recommend, if you're going to do an interview, we had a whole chapter on interviews, but
we had a huge episode. If you're just joining this podcast in midstream, if you will, dig back in the archives to our episode about interviews. I think it's our longest one. I think it went well over an hour, and we could have still kept talking.
And being the host and being the guest, so it worked together to make a more successful interview. I do this every episode at work. I reach out a couple of months before I'm going to record, ask them, hey, would you be interested in talking about this topic? Yes, great. I'll sketch up some questions that we can talk around, some talking points, signposts, as some of the marketing people like to say, and make it conversational. You tell them what the format is and how long it's going to go, and we share this document back and forth. That way, when it gets to recording, it doesn't go off the rails. You don't have those awkward pauses, and they're not caught completely off guard. Those are the ones, as a guest, I am most apprehensive about. Hey, would you come on my podcast? Sure. And then you get an invite to an appointment that says, we're recording on Thursday at 6 p.m. Great. And inevitably, they get one of those questions like, so, Chuck, what were you like as a child? Yeah.
And you see that now that's where we get into, I guess you would say the warning about generating buzz on your podcast. If you come across as a jerk, that's really not going to help your podcast.
Right.
It's just not. You want to be able to stand by what you say. You got to be able to stand by your actions. And I'm a big proponent of this. I really do think that if I'm coming into a podcast blind, like what Chuck is talking about here for an interview, the one thing I'm not going to try to do is be daring or outrageous, and if that is your brand, okay, but there are very few people that can really pull that off and pull that off well. It's one of the things that I like to say. There's a reason why Howard Stern is Howard Stern. Howard Stern, in my opinion, is one of the best interviewers out there, and I would put him right next to, of all people, I would put him right next to Frost, and I'd put him right next to Murrow.
I'd put
Frost, Larry King,
well.
and Howard Stern. And people are like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, you need to listen to him in the interviews. He is not doing the shock jock shtick. He is getting people to answer questions, or he proposes questions that are not, they are strategically awkward. Like I remember one time,
I dare say they almost socially engineer their guest to extract that information that they want, and may not even realize it at the time of where they're going with that. But through the questioning and making them feel comfortable, you get to that point and go, holy cookies. How did they just do that?
One of the best back and forths that for me when it comes to Howard Stern is he had Sarah Michelle Gellar on. This is post Buffy. And you would think that he would ask the really, like, oh, wow, what's your bra size? And, the thing that people think that Howard Stern would ask someone like Sarah Michelle Gellar. And he opened up with, so I understand you're really big about this whole runaway production thing, right? And she was like, oh, yeah. And she went on this huge talk, Sarah Michelle Gellar, about how, we need to have more productions done in the United States. We need to be using more United States locations, United States actors, because runaway projects are really out of control now in Hollywood. And Howard Stern goes, so then how do you explain what happened with Scooby-Doo, which was entirely shot in Australia? You could have heard a pin drop. And her response was, well, that's different. And man, I was like, boom. I mean, that's what makes a good interview a good interview. Not to be daring, but to be real. And I think there are people who think, well, I can do what no, you can't do what Howard Stern does, because he's that good at it. He never went for he only went for the outrageous when it was people who were begging to be on his show, versus people that they were soliciting to be on interviews where they're like, okay, what can I talk about them that no one else is talking about? And it's funny, when you ask Howard Stern, who was it that he regrets never getting on his show? He said it was Hillary Clinton. He said, I think that would have been one of the best interviews of my career. And I believe it, because some of his interviews in the past are just legendary, and not because they are over the top outrageous, but because like what Chuck said, they socially engineer these people to come in, and they just they let their guard down. And I think it's a brilliant way of not just reaching and connecting with a community, but also how you carry yourself as an individual. So
Right.
remember, when you're promoting your show on another show, just, go in with your defenses up and be as professional as possible. If you go for the outrageous, it may backfire you in the most worst possible way. And remember, you're not there promoting yourself. You're promoting your show. You're representing your show.
Yeah, you're representing the whole brand. And the one thing I like about the benefits is afterwards, when you've got that interview posted, you go, hey, I feel really honored to be interviewed by so-and-so. You socialize that, because it's not only getting your name out there, it's getting their name out there. And, or if you're in the reverse role, we just interviewed so-and-so from Star Trek. Odds are they're going to reciprocate that and reshare it as well. So
Right.
more exposure to you.
Right.
So we've talked about that before, so I'm not going to harp on that too much. But don't forget the follow-up stuff as well. That can really go a long way.
Yep. So Chuck, in closing, what else would we say about fishing for listeners? What's some good takeaway points to consider with this?
Many different ways to do it. Find what works for you. Have a promotion ready. Find those podcasts that are able to share and play your promo. Reach out to other podcasters. Get into the ecosystem. Podcast meetups abound everywhere. You don't have to look any further than meetup.com or Clubhouse or any of those social platforms. The podcast community on Facebook, again, is a wonderful place. It's been around for years. There are lots and lots of podcast groups out there, podcasts about podcasts. So it's there. We have covered a lot of them in the book, and many of them here as well. So dive in, get involved. What did I miss, T?
Nope. I think you've hit it all. So just go ahead and take us out.
All right. Don't forget, you can find us and our material and all the back episodes. We mentioned a couple of them at podcastingfordummies.com. Find our books anywhere you find hard copy and online books, anywhere that is. Find the voice line. Contact us. We want to hear from you. Get your opinions. Get your thoughts on this. What worked? What didn't? 703-791-1701. You can use WhatsApp, Google Voice, mobile, whatever it takes. You can watch us record these every couple of months, 6 to 8 weeks or so, as we need a new stockpile, over at twitch.tv/TheTMonster. Join in our live Q&A like many of the people have done here. Don't forget, Podcasting for Dummies, the companion podcast, is protected by Creative Commons, non-commercial, no derivatives, share alike, United States 3.0 license. Find more at creativecommons.org. For me and the T-Monster, pod on. Yeah.
Oh, that's under
like
generating buzz. Yeah. Okay.
Promoting your podcast. This is
Oh.
the other one was all about getting your audience to participate and give you that feedback.
Right.
This is all about getting your name out there and getting that audience. We probably
Yeah.
should reverse these two chapters.
Yeah. Good to know for in the future. Yeah, that's true. That's
Fifth
true.
edition. Make it out.
The joys of using your own book as the blueprint for the podcast. You discover all these things you kind of effed up during the publication. You're like, oh man, we got to fix that on version 5.
Well, I'm not fixing it this summer.
No, we're not. Not this summer. We had an excuse. Look, if we could finish this edition as quickly as we did, there's no excuse for George R.R. Martin to finish his goddamn book. So I'm just going to leave that out there. If a pandemic can't get you to finish a book, you need to hang it up, sister. I'm just saying.